There's a truth that lives deep within the human experience, one so profound it can't be spoken aloud. It's the truth of a silent test, a trial that no therapist can guide you through, no self-help book can decode, and no loved one can fully understand. You might have believed you were simply enduring hard times, just surviving. But what if, all along, you were actually being initiated into one of the deepest transformations a soul can experience? Over decades of work, I've come to recognize these invisible initiations, spiritual and psychological crossings that completely reshape who we are. They don't arrive with announcements or certificates of completion. They unfold quietly deep inside. I've seen individuals undergo what I call the process of individuation, often through a doorway of profound suffering. It's a kind of suffering that leaves no visible scars, yet it rearranges the entire inner world. The signs of such transformation are subtle. You won't find them on motivational posters or social media affirmations. They can only be recognized by souls who've walked through similar fire. Maybe you've already passed this test without realizing it. Maybe it shows in the energy you carry, the way you move through the world in that unmistakable calm that others sense but can't quite name. The 7 signs we'll explore aren't achievements to brag about. They're quiet recognitions, inner confirmations that your consciousness has been changed by its encounter with truth. The second birth. Some souls experience what can only be described as a second psychological birth during their lifetime. Unlike the first, this one doesn't arrive with loud fanfare. It happens in silence, between words, after storms, in the still moment when you realize the person you've been trying to become has quietly been living inside you all along. The real question isn't whether you deserve this transformation. The question is, can you recognize that it's already happening? Like a tree that becomes stronger after surviving a lightning strike, the psyche too gains a new kind of resilience. But it's not the rigid kind that resists everything. It's flexible, fluid, the strength that bends without breaking. It's the ability to take life's chaos and somehow metabolize it into clarity, to turn poison into medicine. The first sign: solitude as sanctuary. The first sign of deep transformation reveals itself in your relationship with solitude. Once, being alone might have felt like punishment. Now it feels sacred, like stepping into a private sanctuary. I've written extensively about the abandonment complex, that deep inner wound that drives us to scatter our energy in search of validation and connection. We chase approval, attention, belonging, hoping to fill a void that seems endless. But when that complex no longer rules your choices, something shifts fundamentally. Your energy stops leaking outward. You stop chasing proof of your worth, and in that stillness, a new kind of peace takes root. It's not the quiet of isolation or depression. It's the stillness that comes from no longer needing to convince anyone of your value, not even yourself. You find you can be alone without that restless urge to fill the silence with noise, distractions, or someone else's energy. Solitude becomes fertile ground. In those quiet moments, your best insights arise, not from conversation with others, but from communion with the deeper self that only appears when the world goes still. This ability to find meaning and creation in solitude is what I identify as a hallmark of the individuated personality. You begin to see how others often run from themselves, through endless entertainment, constant busyness, or relationships that distract more than they connect. You don't judge it. You simply recognize it. You've been there yourself. And then comes the paradox. The more comfortable you become with your own company, the more magnetic you become to others. People sense that your energy isn't needy. It's whole. Your nervous system recalibrates. What once triggered anxiety in the face of uncertainty now stirs curiosity. You no longer fear the unknown. You approach it with something I call active imagination. A willingness to meet mystery head-on, to explore the spaces where one version of you ends and another begins. The second sign, making peace with the shadow. The second sign shows itself in your relationship with your shadow, the parts of you that you used to deny, repress, or fear. Shadow integration has been one of the central themes of my life's work. Learning to stop rejecting the darker aspects of who we are and instead bring them into the light consciously. Before your trial, you might have been terrified to face these sides of yourself, the manipulative parts, the ones hungry for control or validation, the parts capable of wounding others when feeling threatened. But now, something changes. That self-honesty becomes liberating. Instead of fearing these impulses, you understand them. You see that they aren't flaws to be erased. They're raw energies to be channeled with awareness. Even anger transforms. Where it once exploded or festered, it now becomes what I call sacred fire, a force that burns away what no longer serves you. Outdated relationships, limiting patterns, or self-betraying agreements made when you didn't yet know your worth. This anger is no longer destructive. It's directional. It fuels your evolution instead of sabotaging it. Others can feel this integrity in you. Even in silence, your presence carries weight. It's authenticity born of having made peace with your contradictions. You no longer feel the need to resolve every paradox inside you. Instead, you hold them, allowing the tension between opposites to generate growth. This capacity for conscious tension is essential for true psychological maturity. Your relationship with emotional intensity also transforms. Feelings that once overwhelmed you for days or weeks now flow through you with grace. You don't suppress or drown in them. You hold them. You've built an inner container strong enough to handle the full spectrum of human experience. You feel more deeply than ever, but you're no longer ruled by what you feel. It's a partnership now, not possession. The third sign, immunity to projection. The third sign is subtle but powerful. You develop an almost immunity to projection. You begin to see almost in real time when someone is unconsciously projecting their own unprocessed material onto you. When their emotions, insecurities, or narratives are not actually about you at all, but about something unresolved within them. And you recognize this without anger or superiority. It's just data, information about how the psyche behaves when it hasn't yet reached self-awareness. The drama that once consumed your energy now feels foreign, like a language you no longer speak. You start to observe emotional games, manipulations, and triangulations from a distance. Not with judgment, but with the detached curiosity of a researcher studying human behavior. And as your understanding grows, your compassion deepens, but it's no longer the kind of compassion that sacrifices itself. It's mature compassion, presence without absorption. This connects to something I call the transcendent function, the ability to rise above dualistic conflicts and perceive the larger patterns at play. When this function activates, you can sit with someone's crisis without making it your own. Their emergency no longer becomes your emergency. Instead, you recognize where your responsibility ends and theirs begins. You stop rescuing people from the lessons they're meant to face. You understand that stepping back isn't cold, it's clarity. You can finally distinguish between supporting someone's growth and enabling their avoidance. Of course, some people will misinterpret this as detachment or even cruelty. But you know the truth. It's not withdrawal, it's preservation. It's the protection of your sacred energy, your life force. And in that space, something remarkable begins to happen. Time itself starts to change. Your relationship with time begins to feel completely different, where once you experienced it as a relentless opponent, something to race against, something that always seemed to be running out. Now it feels like a living dimension you move within consciously. You stop measuring your life by hours and outcomes and start experiencing it as unfolding presence. Time becomes something to inhabit, not something to defeat. The fourth sign, the blossoming of intuition. The fourth sign of transformation shows up as a sudden deepening of your intuition. What once felt like random hunches now becomes a steady inner compass. The voice of intuition, which may have been drowned out by logic or noise, grows stronger and more trustworthy. Where you used to rely solely on analysis, weighing pros and cons, constructing elaborate arguments, you now find yourself consulting an inner knowing that feels older than your conscious mind. This intuition connects you to information that logic can't always access. It's as if your awareness begins to listen to the invisible layers of existence. Synchronicities begin to multiply, those meaningful coincidences that seem too perfect to be random. You might think of a person and they call moments later, or you find yourself in the right place at the right time without planning it. It starts to feel as though life itself has an intelligence that's communicating with you directly. The crucial shift here is learning to tell the difference between two inner voices. The urgent demands of the wounded ego, which often cry out in fear or impatience, and the quiet guidance of the self, which speaks in calm certainty. The self, that archetype of wholeness at the center of Jungian psychology, emerges more clearly as individuation deepens. You develop a sensitivity to the unseen. You begin to perceive patterns, motivations, and undercurrents in people and situations without being told. Not because you're cynical, but because you're attuned to energy, to the subtle emotional frequencies that reveal what words often hide. You learn to sense truth not from argument but from resonance. Decision-making becomes less about external approval and more about internal alignment. You no longer agonize over endless lists of pros and cons. Instead, there's a direct connection, as though you've established an inner line to ancestral wisdom, to an inner counsel that speaks from beyond your personal story. You begin to trust that your intuition is not random. It's informed by layers of intelligence stored in the collective unconscious. Listening itself becomes a sacred act. You don't just hear words anymore. You hear the silence behind them, the emotional weight they carry, the longing that hides between syllables. You start to listen to people's souls, not their personas, and this listening is not about analysis or judgment. It's a receptive state, one that allows life to reveal itself in its full, messy human complexity. This new relationship with intuition is one of the most profound markers of your transformation. It signals that consciousness has widened its range, that you are no longer confined to the intellect, but are in conversation with the vast intelligence of the universe itself. The fifth sign, the dance of death and rebirth. The fifth sign is your embrace of life's natural cycles, what I call the archetype of death and rebirth. You no longer fear endings the way you once did. You begin to understand that dissolution is part of creation, that death is not destruction but transformation. Where once a sudden loss or collapse felt like the end of everything, now it feels like the beginning of something unseen. You stop clinging to stability as the only form of safety. You realize that real safety lies in your ability to adapt, to be reborn again and again without losing your essence. Periods when your life seems to fall apart, when relationships end, careers shift, identities crumble, become familiar territory. You've been here before, you know this terrain, you trust the process even when it hurts. Because you've learned that the void is fertile, that what feels like nothingness is actually the soil of your next self. Your relationship with uncertainty changes completely. You no longer avoid it. You engage with it, even welcome it. You understand that growth happens in that liminal space between decision and outcome, the moment where faith is required. You start acting not for guaranteed results, but because the action itself feels aligned with your inner truth. In this stage, a new kind of energetic economy emerges within you. You stop scattering your energy across dozens of draining commitments or performing for external approval. You begin to invest your life force wisely, like a gardener tending the most important crops. You become deliberate about where you place your attention, your time, your creativity. You also learn that growth isn't linear. It moves in spirals. The same themes return, but at deeper levels of understanding each time. This awareness brings a kind of patience. You stop demanding that your healing or your progress look like constant upward motion. You realize that sometimes evolution looks like standing still, or even falling apart before integration happens. Your creativity changes too. It's no longer about achievement or validation. You no longer create to prove your worth. You create because it's how the life force moves through you. Art, ideas, writing, relationships, they all become expressions of communion with that deeper flow. Creation itself becomes prayer. And in this creative communion, you find a new peace. You stop measuring your work by external metrics of success. You start measuring it by authenticity, by whether it feels true. You begin to understand that every act of honest creation is a small act of resurrection. The sixth sign, freedom from validation. The sixth sign emerges in your relationship with validation, or more precisely, your independence from it. The philosopher Alfred Adler called it the inferiority complex. That deep wound that drives people to constantly prove themselves, to compare, to compete, to seek affirmation from the outside world. When you move through individuation, this entire complex dissolves. The need to measure your worth against others simply fades. It's not that you stop caring about excellence. It's that your definition of excellence becomes internal. You stop asking, "What will people think?" and start asking, "Is this aligned with who I really am?" You develop what Jung called inner authority, a psychological foundation that validates your experience without needing external confirmation. Your self-worth becomes stable, self-generating. You could receive criticism or praise, rejection or applause, and your inner state barely wavers. Both are processed as information, not as verdicts. This freedom is revolutionary. All the energy that once went into managing your image, controlling perception, or chasing recognition becomes available again. You start to live with unfiltered authenticity. You stop performing and start existing. Rejection doesn't wound you the way it used to. You'd rather be disliked for who you are than loved for a version of yourself that isn't real. Authenticity stops being an aspiration. It becomes your natural state. This authenticity extends even to your physical presence. Your body begins to move differently. There's a groundedness in how you walk, how you occupy space. You don't shrink or expand to fit in. You simply are. You belong to yourself first. You inhabit your body like a home. Not a project to be fixed, but a sacred vessel for your soul's expression. In this phase, your nervous system settles into a kind of rhythm that feels deeply safe. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop apologizing for existing. You realize that worthiness was never something to earn. It was something to remember. And that remembrance changes everything. The seventh sign, energetic sovereignty. The seventh and final sign of this transformation reveals itself through a refined sense of how you invest your energy. I call this stage energetic sovereignty. The ability to protect your essence without defensiveness, to maintain your inner clarity without retreating from life. This isn't about building walls or becoming untouchable. It's about realizing that your life force is sacred, and you have the authority to decide where it flows. You begin to sense, with almost surgical precision, which people, environments, and conversations nourish you, and which quietly drain you. Without bitterness or judgment, you simply stop giving your energy to what diminishes your light. You learn to say no without guilt, to walk away without resentment. Boundaries stop feeling like fences. They become expressions of respect for yourself and for others. You move through the world with a natural authority, not the kind that seeks control, but the kind that radiates self-possession. People feel this. They can't always name it, but they sense that your presence has weight. You don't need to dominate or persuade. Your integrity speaks louder than any argument ever could. The guilt that once came with saying no dissolves. You no longer apologize for protecting what's precious inside you. Your energy becomes a garden, tended carefully, cultivated with intention. You no longer scatter seeds on barren soil. You invest your attention only where growth is possible. And as you refine this awareness, something even deeper begins to shift. Your relationship with suffering itself, the transformation of suffering. Where once pain was something to be avoided or escaped, it now becomes your teacher. You no longer see suffering as punishment or failure. Instead, you recognize it as a process, one that strips away illusion and reveals truth. You don't chase suffering, of course. You don't romanticize it. But when it comes, as it inevitably does, you meet it differently. You don't flinch. You don't numb out. You don't demand that it leave before you've learned its lesson. You understand that pain, when met with awareness, transforms. It refines the soul. The storms that used to shatter you now deepen you. You realize that you've stopped needing to recover from life. Instead, you've learned to create from it. Each challenge becomes raw material for wisdom. Every wound becomes an opening for light. And from this inner alchemy arises a profound stillness, not an absence of movement, but a deep, grounded presence that follows you everywhere. It's a quiet strength that doesn't announce itself. Others feel it around you but can't explain why. It's the serenity of someone who has met themselves completely and lived to tell the story. This stillness attracts people who are unconsciously seeking what you've found, though they might not have the words for it. They sense that you carry something ancient, something earned. You become, in essence, a living example of the individuated soul. Whole, integrated, quietly radiant. The maturing of hope. Another subtle shift takes place. You begin to relate differently to hope. Once, hope may have been an escape, a fantasy about a future that would finally make everything okay. Now it becomes something deeper, steadier. You no longer hope for specific outcomes. You trust the process of life itself. You develop faith, not blind belief, but the confidence that whatever arises, you'll meet it fully. This is what it means to evolve from wishful thinking into what I call active faith. A trust not in circumstances, but in consciousness. Your hope is no longer, I hope this turns out the way I want. It becomes, I trust that whatever happens, I can meet it with wisdom and grace. And with that realization, something profound happens. You stop waiting for life to begin. You realize it's been unfolding all along, even in the moments that felt like endings. Psychological independence. This transformation marks what I describe as a second psychological birth, a reorganization of consciousness that frees you from your early conditioning. You are no longer defined by the scripts written in childhood, the expectations of family, or the cultural programming that told you who to be. You stop living reactively, constantly adjusting to please others or avoid pain. Instead, you begin to live creatively, shaping your experience from the inside out. You've stepped out of the loop of reaction and into the flow of creation. This isn't about perfection. It's about integration. You no longer need to fix yourself because you've come to understand there was never anything truly broken. Only parts of you waiting to be brought home. You stop striving to become someone else. The person you were fighting to become is revealed as a limitation compared to who you already are. The mask falls away. What remains is essence, unapologetic, unfiltered, whole. And with that realization, an enormous sense of completion settles in. Not the completion that comes from achieving goals, but the quiet peace of inner reconciliation. You have stopped running from your past. You no longer need to recover from it because you've made peace with it. You've harvested its wisdom and integrated its lessons. Your journey continues, of course. It always does. But something fundamental has ended. The cycle of unconscious suffering has completed itself. You've emerged not untouched, but transformed. The living testimony of wholeness. When you've passed through this kind of silent initiation, you begin to embody a different kind of presence. You carry the quiet dignity of someone who has faced themselves completely and survived, not by defeating their darkness, but by embracing it. You understand now that the soul doesn't grow despite suffering. It grows through it. Transformation doesn't happen by avoiding the pain, but by entering it consciously, allowing it to strip away what's false. Your wounds have become your wisdom. Your pain has become your teacher. Your stillness has become your strength. And perhaps most beautifully, your transformation becomes a gift to others. You don't need to preach or persuade. Your very existence offers a kind of permission for others to face their own silence, to trust their own process, to believe that healing is not just possible, but inevitable when approached with awareness. Your evolution becomes a template of possibility. You are living proof that consciousness can be reborn in a single lifetime, that the soul can shed its old skin and step into a new form of being without ever leaving the body. The journey continues, and so you arrive here, different, quieter, but more alive than ever. You've endured the soul's most demanding test and emerged integrated, aware, whole. The person you once thought you had to become is no longer the goal. You've outgrown that version of yourself. Now your task is simpler yet infinitely deeper: to live from this awareness. To walk through the world with open eyes, an open heart, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows their place in the great unfolding of life. The transformation you've undergone is not an ending, it's a beginning. The conscious evolution of your soul has only just begun.